Coach Robb Podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb Performance Podcast number 4. I'm your host, Toolman Dan. Coach Robb, how are we doing today?
Hey, good afternoon, brother. Thank you so much for carving out some time in your day. I am really excited about this performance podcast today.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one, man. This is going to be the fine line between being fit and frustrated.
Yes, sir. Yep. This is.
See what I did there, Coach Robb? You see what I did?
Yep. I appreciate it very much. I never want to, you and I talk about this all the time. We never want to be offensive, but we like to have fun. And sometimes people will say, what? So very well done. I never really thought about doing it that way, but props to you. We may have to run with that concept. That was a good one.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
No, this is great. And, you do bring up a good point. When we look at that fine line between being super fit, and when I say super fit, I want to make sure that our listeners, they could be somebody on a super mini, it could be somebody in the vet class and anywhere in between. If I know we do have a pretty good following of some professionals that follow us, and I'm forever grateful for that. But regardless of what sport you might want to excel at, especially for those of us who have families, we have jobs, or for some of the younger athletes, they have school, they've got other things that they've got to balance as well. When we look at that, no pun intended, that fine line between being super fit and being super frustrated, boy, we can cross that quite a bit. And as we'll talk about today, there's some very specific things that you can pay attention to that keep you from avoiding that level of frustration. And we've talked about it ironically when we looked at Epstein-Barr and adrenal fatigue, but we're going to kind of back the train up even further than that. And then we're actually going to catapult like a pole vaulter and look at that idea that some of our subscribers have really been kind enough to let us know, hey, what you've been recommending, I've been trying, it's been working, but now I'm having new levels. And literally, Dan, like you and I say, it's for those that like the motor world, you build a modded motor, there comes more frustrations. There's that fine line between it just performing optimally or just completely grenading itself. So Hopefully we can demystify some of that today.
Yep. Before we get started, I just want to thank all of our listeners, all of our viewers on YouTube. If you haven't, make sure you guys like and subscribe. It helps us out. Share with your friends. Also give us comments, feedback. We love to hear it. Like Coach Robb said, we get feedback from you guys, and it helps us to drive these topics that we talk about, and hopefully that we can do something to help you. Let's get into it, Coach Robb. There's a huge difference between becoming fit fast and staying there. And I think that is one of the most important parts is, how to stay there, because that could be the most challenging piece. You have residual fatigue year after year until you become super fit. It's getting fit doesn't happen overnight, right? You have to build. It's a platform that you're continuously building on, and you do get fatigued doing that, and you got to monitor the stages of fatigue and know when you are fatigued. If you're an amateur rider, triathlete, swimmer, whatever you are, right? As an amateur and as a professional.
You hit the nail on the head. You and I did a podcast looking at the challenges associated decade by decade. And it's very interesting because if you think back to go back to your 20s, maybe you were fresh out of college, starting your career, no children, maybe you're converting that relationship into a marriage. Now, all of a sudden, a few things change. The way the money is spent, the way time is divided. And then you look at somebody, and I've had some very kind emails that have been sent in. And if you're new to our podcast here, I want to encourage you, contact at coachrobb.com. Please feel free to send in any questions, comments, concerns. But in this case, I had some nice compliments that came in that said, hey, I love the fact that I'm 15, 20 pounds lighter, but now I've got some new challenges. Maybe because I've decreased my percentage of body fat, I find myself sweating easier, and now chronic dehydration becomes an issue. As you decrease percentage of body fat, you can find yourself starting to run out of energy a little bit quicker. And we can get into a whole discussion about you become more efficient, and therefore you burn calories a little bit quicker. You mentioned the fatigue, Dan, especially when we start looking at heat related fatigue. If we go back and reference the motor world, what's the number one nemesis for horsepower? Heat. And I don't think let me rephrase that. I think that people underestimate the residual fatigue associated with being exposed to that heat day in and day out. And even going so far in, I want to be very careful how I say this because I don't want to step on anyone's toes. I firmly believe that once you get into your race season, and with my athletes, we try to peak 2 to maybe 3 times a year. It doesn't mean that we don't do some pickup races, but those triple priority races that really matter, you need your highest quality to be sport specific, and everything else needs to be indoors in a controlled environment, very, very cold. And that catches some people off guard. So Dan, you mentioned a professional triathlete or an elite level age group athlete. It could be a motocross rider, off-road. It could be a wakeboarder. When you're out and you're training specifically to your sport, sure, you need to expose yourself to the heat, the humidity, and the intensity level. But what's the purpose of all those other cross-training sessions? If you're in the gym, it's to get stronger, or if you're in competitive mode, maybe you're just trying to keep the tensile strength of the tendons and ligaments maintained. Well, go to the gym and not let heat undermine the potential of quality that you can get out of that strength session. So stop and think about that. If you're going in the gym and the space that you're working out is really cold, at first you're going to go in, you might be a little bit chilly, but once you get that body warmed up, look at how much more power you can put out because you're not having to balance and offset heat. If you're doing a cardio session, whether it's to burn body fat and improve aerobic capacity, or maybe you're doing some interval work, well, if you go in there and you make the room extremely cold, you're going to be able to focus on putting out that quality. You're able to hit those threshold intensities without being physically or mentally derailed because of heat and humidity. So, Dan, you made a comment at the opening of the podcast here today. Fatigue that stacks day after day, week over week, year over year, and for some of our subscribers, decade over decade. That heat, and let me back up. When you get exposed to heat on a daily basis, yeah, that's fatigue. Then it goes into heat exhaustion. And then if you've ever dealt with heat exhaustion, just like any other virus, the propensity of you becoming run down because of the heat becomes easier and easier each time you become heat exhausted. Does that make sense at all?
It does. I've had it before, and
okay.
And I'm much more susceptible now to getting it again. I mean, I could literally feel myself getting it, and I know that that's it for me. That's unfortunately I got to pull off the track, or hell, sometimes I was sharing with you before we started the pod, we went to the fair, the state fair, and it's been 112 degrees in California, and walking around, it's like, man, okay, I got to find some shade, because you start feeling weird, if you've ever had that heat exhaustion before. That especially right now, Coach Robb's probably the first one to start with, because we are in the summer months of the year. It's, for whatever crazy reason, it's hot across the United States right now, everywhere. So the heat is something that we definitely need to keep an eye on.
We have to take it and keep a real close eye on it. And for those of you that have been following us in all of our podcasts, stop and think how many times you hear us bring up the subject of calorie intake. And if you have followed us for any period of time, we try to keep nutrition very simple. Unless you have a food allergy or some kind of a negative reaction, you should, every time you open your mouth, try to have a fruit, a vegetable, and a lean source of protein. Well, if you stop and think about what's in fruits and vegetables, they're both high in water. They're both high in vitamins and minerals, which are catalysts for energy. They're high in electrolytes. Well, what are the 3 things that you need for a muscle contraction? You need water, you need electrolytes, and you need sugar. And fruits and vegetables provide that. So I want to be very cautious. I don't ever want our podcast to come across as being negative Nelly or disrespectful or condescending, but I will be transparent. It makes my skin crawl when I hear these so-called internet experts saying, don't eat something because it has sugar in it. Now, when I say don't eat something and it's processed and it's loaded with sugar, that's to me an obvious. But to tell somebody not to eat a fruit or a vegetable because of the sugar content, I think that that's very irresponsible. And the reason why I say it so adamantly is, if I have a piece of protein let's just say a chicken breast, and I have a high sugar item like a banana. Well, you get into the concentration rates. For those of us who like motorcycles, it's like mixing two-stroke oil. If you put too much oil in, you foul a plug. If you don't put enough oil in, you seize the motor. Think about that finite range. And people go, gosh, nutrition is so complicated. It's really not. The internet pundits like to make it complicated because they want to make you dependent on them. They definitely love to work in a mode of fear. Oh, they'll villainize the sugar content of a banana. Well, it's very simple. Have a banana with maybe some berries, maybe some more on the lower glycemic, the lower sugar range. Have those with protein. And if you start looking at the concentration rate, it's simple percentages. If you have protein with complex carbohydrates, which a fruit and a vegetable is, right? Because you're eating it, you're not drinking it, you're eating it. Now, I don't want that to be confusing. If you're juicing, you're still getting all the fiber and you're still getting those raw nutrients. But what I'm saying is orange juice or apple juice, especially when you can hold it up to the light, that would be considered high glycemic, high sugar content. Well, we're coming back to today's conversation about, well, where's that fine line between being fit and being frustrated? Chronic hydration is probably one of the easiest ones. And Dan, you just reiterated it again. Exposure to heat, not so much in California, but on the East Coast, high humidity levels. So now water cannot evaporate from the skin. And then we go out and we perform athletic endeavors. For those followers that ride moto, every square centimeter of your body is covered, whether that be road racing, it could be off-road, it could be motocross, supercross. Compare that to my triathletes at Ironman Hawaii. They have a very, very, 1 millimeter neoprene type of material that's designed to wick away the sweat. So their internal cooling function is 100% easier, not to mention they're not on a hot motorcycle. Then when you go to ball and stick, like football, lacrosse, when you start stacking that gear on, the ability for the body to get that internal heat out, it becomes slow. It becomes slowed down, which then causes that internal. Now we're back to heat exhaustion. Constant exposure becomes fatigue. And then, as you said, you have no resiliency whatsoever to it.
So the key is to get the heat off of you, correct? Like if you're going to sweat, you want the sweat to come out and you want it to dissipate and leave, right? That's the goal.
That's exactly right. And for those of you that follow us in the motocross environment, think about when Chase Sexton was riding for Geico and he went to WW Ranch and went 1 DNS, right? So this is a guy that's living in Florida. He's training in Florida. And there was a lot of discussion after that race where he didn't start the second moto, even though he won the first moto. And that was because he trained a lot during the off season, which in Florida, there really is not a winter per se. Then you come into that preseason, gets exposed to a lot of heat. Well, now we're in competitive mode, training during the week in hot, humid conditions, trying to race in hot, humid conditions, trying to recover in hot, humid conditions. I hope I'm not insulting anyone's intelligence, but that mathematically goes backwards. It never goes better. You can't train in the heat, race in the heat, and try to recover in the hot, humid conditions and do that week over week, month over month, training block over training block, year over year, as you said at the onset of today's conversation.
And I think that's a huge misconception, right? For any sport, if you are at elevation and you run at elevation, that you're always going to be better because you run, train, recover in elevation. Or if you are a motocross racer and you live in Florida and you train, ride, race, recover in Florida because it's humid, like that doesn't always equate, right? You don't always have the advantage in those conditions. Is that what you're saying?
100%. I've mentioned on the show before a dear friend of mine, Hunter Kemper. He's made the Olympics 3 times for the sport of triathlon. And his family is from, obviously he grew up here, but he does not live in Florida because of that exact reason. He recognizes that he cannot recover in these types of conditions. So he literally, his profession allows him to be able to move around the world. Jan Frodeno, our number 1 triathlete, Gustav Eden, Christian Blumenfeld in the triathlon side, they literally move around the globe. They lay out their race schedule and then they reverse engineer where they're going to train when. So that way and here's the key word. And I know we've mentioned it before. So for those that are following us religiously, please pardon the duplication and the redundancy. the definition of overtraining is not how much you do, but the ability to recover from the work that you do. And that's why I'm so big on, you need to know your sweat rate. You've got to know your calorie burn rate. If we could just minimize those two components, we stand a fighting chance to be successful. And again, I want to go back to the vet rider. I want to go back to those riders and those athletes that are balancing a family, balancing a job, and want to still keep that body fat low. And you finally shed that fat and you see your speed coming around, you see the endurance coming around, only to be undermined, not because of a fitness issue, but because of hydration or a calorie gap. Dan, you and I talked about this off the record a couple months ago. It's like somebody goes out and buys a V12 Ferrari, but yet if they don't run the radiator, if the radiator runs empty, you run piss poor gas in it, all the things that the motor needs. You're not running the highest quality oil that the motor's been literally designed and needs to perform optimally. I know some of our listeners may roll their eyes and go, well, I'm no Ferrari. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Oh, no, I'm 100 pounds overweight. You're still a Ferrari. As you said to me off the record, there's abs underneath there. You can feel them coming out. It's just, you got to melt the body fat on top. But when you look at somebody in a magazine that's got 6-pack abs, everybody, well, I should say 95% of all humans, your abdominals look exactly like the anatomical chart. The only thing that stands between what you see in the anatomical chart and what you see on yourself is going to be fat. And for some like myself, I don't care. Even when I was an elite athlete on the junior development team for sport of triathlon at Colorado Springs, my percentage of body fat was at 4.5%. I did not have 6-pack abs. So hopefully that's some words of encouragement for someone who's like, really busting their balls, trying to lose that body fat. They're in the gym building the muscle, and they're not getting that ripped look, but understand that there are some other components like genetics and things that factor in.
That is me, Coach Robb, just so you know.
Absolutely.
You're speaking.
Absolutely.
I know you're speaking directly to me.
That's exactly right.
I think one of the things is, that another misconception, or maybe people that are misled, right? We talk about the calorie gap. We talk about the chronic dehydration, right? When we're trying to lose weight, when we look at ourselves and be like, oh my God, I got to lose some body fat. I need to start cutting calories, and I need to start, get the water weight off me, right? So now we start not drinking water because we don't want the water weight, and then we stop eating food because we don't want the calories. And next thing you know, we're fatiguing ourselves, and we don't even know it, right? We're looking for that instant satisfaction or gratification that, hey, I could not drink enough water for a week, and I could jump on the scale and I'm 7-8 pounds lighter, which you would be, right? So you're looking for that gratification, but it's the wrong way to.
I want the listeners to think about almost like a pendulum. And I'm going to go backwards. If we're looking at 10,000 foot and we're looking back and talking to somebody who professionally, or maybe we've got somebody who's listening, maybe they've been at the top of their game as an amateur, and then they saw that start to go away from them. And then as they got educated, they realized insufficient calorie intake, chronic dehydration. And because those two things are in full play, now sleep is negatively affected, which is where you release the recovery hormones, testosterone and HGH. Well, now they're looking at it, let's say 15 years after the fact, and they have that aha epiphany where they go, okay, now I understand why I couldn't maintain the fitness I created. That's why I love the way that you opened it up, because for some guys, they're probably thinking what you originally opened out as they started to complete your sentence. They're like, I am so effing mad here, right? Well, that is just frustration, because here you are putting in the work, no pun intended, the sweat equity, and you're not seeing the results sustain. You got them up, but then you can't maintain them. And it becomes very, very frustrating for people, because it seems counterintuitive. When I don't sleep, my body fat goes up. When I eat less and less calories, body fat's going to go up. Well, that's not even what we're talking about in this context. I don't have the energy to get out the door and exercise. I don't have the energy to finish my races. In fact, I don't even want to go racing anymore, because the training is so abysmal. who in the world's going to be motivated to race if you can't emulate it in training? And I hope people understand that. You should never ask your body to do something in racing that you haven't at least exposed it to in training. Now, that does not mean that we don't go deep. At the Olympics, when it's a 3-man race or a 5-man with 2 miles to go, and there's only 3 podium spots, sure, you're going to have to go deep. But when you're in that situation, and by the way, this has happened at the Olympics. If you want to go back and look at the Sydney Olympics, first time triathlon was in the sport of the Olympics. And then you go back and you look at each sequential, it's always come down to a running race off the bike. Now stop and think about this. Put yourself in the real world, and you guys can go to YouTube and watch the finish of the 2000 Olympics and the 2004 Olympics, even go to 08 if you want to. Can you imagine, Dan, you've trained 15 years of your life and you come off the bike and there's 10 guys and you've got 6.2 miles to run. Let's just say for even numbers, it's 4 loops. You get to the end of the 4th loop and you're down to maybe 8 or 10 guys. You get down to 2 loops and there's 5 guys left. At that point, every single workout that you finished is going to come into play. Every one of those workouts was a small deposit in the savings account. And there's 2 laps to go. And this is not the place that I want somebody saying, I wish I was a little faster. Wish I had a little better top end speed. I wish I'd dialed my nutrition a little bit better. I wish I didn't come in as tired as I am. Because that's, and again, I always use the Olympics as an example because people put that on such a pedestal because it is so hard. You're looking at peaking one day over a 4-year period of time. And you screw the pooch on that one, you don't get another chance for 4 years. Now, I want people to take the seriousness of the Olympics and put it into what you do on a week-to-week basis. You still have that same opportunity, but what we don't want you to do is give yourself a chance to go work out and then have regrets because you're dehydrated, you're undernourished, and you're not sleeping enough. That's why I say there's such a fine line between being and feeling super fit, but I want to focus on the word fit because unfortunately, you could be super fit, but if you're dehydrated and you're not eating enough calories, your energy is going to wane. It's not a threat. It's 100% physiological fact. Now, there'll be people who will argue with me and say, yeah, let's argue ketosis. Let's argue intermittent fasting. Let's argue all these different things that people like to jump on a bandwagon with. I'm not discounting the fact that the body will adapt when you put it in a state of ketosis or you do intermittent fasting. But that does not mean that that's a desirable environment that the body would prefer to exist in. Dan, if you and I were out in a private plane and it crashes, thank goodness our body's been created in a way that it will strive to survive in a threatening environment. However, when you have a basic understanding of fruits and vegetables and lean protein are all low glycemic, it's going to balance the alkalinity and the pH that people like to argue with. So the idea here is, are you eating a complex carbohydrate? Yes, fruits and vegetables. Are you offsetting the acidity associated with animal products? Yes. pH and alkalinity is offset through fruits and vegetables with lean protein. You see how simple nutrition is, Dan?
Yeah.
But when we come back to the idea that we may have a listener who's like, man, I really lost that weight and I'm enjoying being fit. Well, now it crosses into frustration only because they might be applying old rules to the new game. Before you maybe needed 2,300 calories. Well, you've put on lean muscle mass. That calorie demand might be up to 27 or 28 or even 3,000. That messes with people's brains big time. And as you become more muscular, you sweat more. So you need to know what your sweat rate is. And as we've discussed in previous shows, you already know, take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and that's how many ounces of water you need to consume over a 10-hour period. So now you've put on muscle mass, which everybody wants. That causes the hydration demands to go up, but you're still using your old weight numbers. So that's the idea between frustration and being fit and sustainable.
I think people have a hard time grasping that, hey, I've been in the gym, I've been working out, I was on this diet, and now my arms are bigger, my legs are bigger, and you're telling me I have to eat more? That doesn't make sense, it's not what the normal person would think, right?
100%. And for anybody, you don't even have to be into motocross or into car racing or anything else. Just think about the car or truck that you drive on a daily basis. What are you going to get better gas mileage out of, a V8 or a V4? Okay. Now, what would you rather tow your boat with? You got a 2,800 pound boat. Would you rather try to tow that with a V4 or a V8? So if we can constantly draw those illustrations and those parallels, we all want that power of the V8. We want the ease of being able to handle high levels of speed, high levels of endurance. We opened up today talking about being resilient, as you say, to uncharacteristically hot conditions on the West Coast. Well, if you have a basic understanding and you can think about running a set of hurdles, you want to be able to run through each one of those hurdles, knock it down, and still keep your top end speed to knock the next hurdle and the next hurdle. Well, for you, and with the abnormal heat, hydrated, fed, and rested, you can knock every hurdle down day after day. But that's where we want to educate people how, quantify it.
Are you saying that you're supposed to knock hurdles down?
In this case, yes, sir.
Wow, I've never actually heard that. You learn something every day.
There you go. Well, the idea is, if we reverse engineer this from the perspective of a fifth grader, if they trip and fall on the first hurdle, how much energy do they have to get to the second hurdle? Well, try to get them to the third hurdle. Well, if you have, even go younger, say you have a 6-month-old baby, and we've talked about this on the podcast together as well, just because you fed them, you have them in clean clothing, and you lay them down to go to bed, if you don't satisfy that fundamental need to satisfy hunger, that child will sit and cry all night long. It will not cry itself to sleep if it's extremely hungry. And that's the idea here. You want to continue, you fill in the blank. You want to continue to be fit. You want to be fast. You want to have endurance, whatever your sport of choice is. Now, what's interesting is when you're rested and you're fed and you're hydrated, all those hurdles, you don't get so irritated that it's 112 degrees at the fair, because your body has all of its elements it needs, just like a motor. You know, if you've got a brand new truck or car and you're driving and you start seeing the heat gauge go up, or you start getting a red alert, what's the very first thing that you do? Pop the hood and start looking inside the engine. And that's what we want to encourage our listeners to do, because when you start looking at it, it doesn't matter what sport you're involved with. If you've got somebody who, like for example, my wife, Michaela, she grew up in an artistic family. She was never considered an athlete, but yet she's done half a dozen Ironmans. She's done 3 or 4 marathons. She's tons and tons of half Ironmans. My point in bringing that up is she didn't get into endurance sports until she was in her 30s. So for her, she had to kind of build that athletic maturity, sometimes to the point where somebody who may have started as a teenager, but they were constantly dehydrated, calorie gap, not sleeping very well. You can get somebody that starts in their 25, 35, even 45, and actually surpass somebody who's been an athlete their whole life because of what you opened up today's conversation with, kind of the stacking of fatigue. It's very easy to start to surpass somebody, even though they may be better equipped, i.e. fitter, maybe even more raw talent. But hey, what do you and I say for our motorcycle fans? If you've got a factory 450 and I have a PW50, as absurd as it may sound, my PW50 is faster than that factory 450 if I have fuel and you don't. It's as simple as that.
Sure.
You know, maybe a PW may not be a good example. Maybe you take a 65 and we're going to race 5 laps. Well, if you're on empty after 1 lap, I win. I didn't go as fast as I could have if I was on a 450, but I still win because I had all the elements. And I say this with all of my clients. The person who wins on race day isn't the fastest. It's he or she that minimizes mistakes.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what sport you like.
And that's efficient. Efficiency.
Absolutely.
Efficiency wins
in
the end.
For those of you that ride moto, we've got Loretta Lynn's coming up next week. And just fly in there and walk around the pits on Thursday and talk to people and compare the conversations to Monday. Monday, everybody's just thinking about practice is over. We've got our first round of motos tomorrow. They're not even thinking about managing fatigue until fatigue smacks them in the face. It's too late. You can't play catch up on fatigue, heat, humidity, intensity, race duration, a moto every day. Like you said, you got to minimize mistakes. Smooth is fast, fast is smooth, efficient saves energy. Think about that. By Thursday, Friday, you can only imagine how much managing fatigue has become the main conversation, which I find interesting, because if we talk about it like right now being proactive, a lot of people are going to go, it doesn't matter. until that fatigue factor smacks them square in the eyes. They're like, all right, well, now I got to do something. Just like being injured, right? What is our mantra with injuries? The second injury is always worse than the first because we didn't recover completely from the first one. So now we're down for a year because we went out on the road with the nagging fill in the blank.
Yeah. That brings me to a question that I wanted to ask, and that is, we see a lot of athletes, they are fit, right? But they're trying to manage staying fit and not being effed, frustrated, right? And frustration could be a lot of different things, but I know that like in triathlons, a lot of the foundations and organizations, they've got a lot of races. They got a lot of events that these athletes are doing. Same with swimming. If some of these competitive swimming groups, they're doing a lot of swimming. I'm into motocross, right? So in the motocross world, we have a lot of races. How are these athletes able to make it through without getting effed? Like, I'll give you an example, Coach. There's a lot of riders in the motocross series that have been out, that haven't been able to make it through the season, whether it's been an illness or an injury. And I was wondering if you could shed some light on maybe why that is happening from a physiologist side. Maybe you can give us some details on why you think maybe that's happening.
Well, and ironically, we're seeing the same thing in the professional triathlon realm as well, because we used to have 4 distances. We'd have a sprint distance, we'd have an Olympic, we'd have a half Ironman and an Ironman distance. And there's been a lot of shifting around of where the money is at the Ironman distance. And now there's a lot more races on the calendar to the point where these pros can race almost every weekend. It's almost identical to what we see in the motocross side of the world as well. This is where we get back to when you have a sport where young age is at the essence. And if we look specifically at these factory motocross teams, some of these guys are turning pro at 17 and 18 years old. If you look at Ironman, you see these guys reaching their athletic maturity at 32 to 35, even 36. And then they get a good 10-year run because of the athletic maturity and the athletic durability. And if you go back and you rewind this podcast today, right? If you have somebody who's 15, 16 years old, and you get an uneducated trainer that says, we need to cut weight, especially when we're racing anything that has a motor, strength to weight ratios are a big deal. It's very sexy, very popular to start running around and saying, all right, we're going to cut body fat by restricting calories. We're going to double the distance. We're going to double the duration of all of your workouts. We're going to cut weight, the old wrestling term that everybody is so familiar with. But I want to reverse the psychology on this, because Dan, you just mentioned something that we see in every sport. Doesn't matter if it's a ball and stick sport, a motor sport, or an endurance event. There's a point of diminishing returns. So if you have somebody who's extremely young and literally maybe just hit puberty 6 months or not even a year ago, and they're carrying body fat because literally, no pun intended, baby fat, right? You've got to allow the testosterone and the HGH to drop in a healthy manner. But I want you to think about the double-edged sword with this. You have a young individual who's growing bone, growing tendons, growing ligaments and muscles. At the precise time they get under the tutelage of an uneducated trainer that says, well, look at all the success I've had with these other guys. And I find it interesting. You're touting that you've had a lot of success, but ironically, the ones that tout they've had a lot of success have actually had more people get injured, burn out, and their racing career is over than the people that they've actually helped. And it doesn't matter if it's motocross, supercross, triathlon, wakeboarding, elite level running. We've seen it all. Remember, we have 4 verticals of business. We have a ball and stick sport, a motorsports division, an endurance division, and a weight loss division. The consistency on the end result is 100% there. When you run somebody too long, too hard, with not enough calories, it leads to inadequate sleep. And as we said earlier, inadequate sleep, inadequate calories, inadequate hydration leads to physical and mental burnout. Nobody's immune to it. So you bring up a very important point. When we see these professional triathletes where, they're racing 2 times a month and their races are 8 hours in duration, for some of the top guys we've got that are under 8 hours now for the Ironman distance. Now bounce that same burnout rate, right? We see athletes that are having to race 7.5, 8 hours. They're training 25 to 30 hours a week. Then they got to go race 2 times a month, only because that's the demands of the race series. They've got points and they've got all kinds of things that in the triathlon side, we have what's called the PTO, which is a ranking system. And that ranking system obviously is based on race results. So these guys are on a treadmill. These men and women are on a treadmill to try to accumulate points to be ranked in the PTO. And unfortunately, we're seeing a high level of attrition. The other thing that we see is a lot of inconsistencies. You'll see guys, both men and women, early in the season, they'll have stellar 1 or 2 races, and then they essentially disappear. If you jump over to motorsports, what becomes very interesting with motorsports is when you see a team that doesn't have full representation on the track, they start getting hit with financial ramifications. So you see them making some fill-in riders, you see them making some impromptu, substitutions. Now that's where one end of the pendulum is. Now we take the pendulum back the other side. You have young developing athletes who are under the tutelage of uneducated people saying, do it this way, not understanding why. They don't look at the overall volume of a week. They don't know what percentage of intensity. And if you take our entire conversation today and we use like a funnel illustration, they're just dumping the athlete into the top of the funnel. The athlete is getting more and more burnout. It gets to the bottom of the funnel and they say, suck it up, buttercup. This guy's doing it. This guy's doing it. You need to do it or you're going to get terminated. So they jump back in the funnel and they'll keep recycling into that funnel until, as we said earlier, the body will adapt until it can no longer adapt. Now, it doesn't matter if it's triathlon, professional running, wakeboarding, skateboarding, BMX freestyle, motocross, supercross, it doesn't matter. The system will continue to let you jump into the funnel until you can't. And then when you can't any longer, they just dispose of you and they replace you with somebody else who can, which leads to another whole ethical set of questions that you have to think about at being a young athlete that's jumping into a series where, and this is where I think it's important for people to understand, there's a difference between getting to being the best and then excelling when you're one of the best in the world. It's not about just towing the line at an Ironman and saying, okay, I've made it. I'm a professional triathlete. I have a professional card. Well, it doesn't mean you're going to make a living. It doesn't mean that you're going to make more than a living, like become wealthy off of it. And it doesn't matter what sport we see it in. The problem is it goes back to, like we said earlier, inadequate calories, inadequate hydration results in inadequate sleep. You stack that into a pressure cooker environment where you're paid to perform. And then when you don't perform well, you get pushed even harder. And especially when it's, well, see, you got that extra body fat. So they put the fear into them instead of going in, hey, let's look at the principles of physiology. Maybe you just hit puberty 18 months ago. Give it another 18 months. People go, oh, it's ridiculous. We don't have time for that. Well, how else are you going to drop the body fat? Start starving the athlete, which then negatively affects sleep. Now you've got an athlete, and we've talked about this, but I'll bring it up briefly. When you have an athlete that's eating an insufficient amount of calories, they have low blood sugar levels. Low blood sugar levels will lead to depth perception issues. Well, now you have a depth perception issue, which means now, let's take a motocross rider, your ability to perceive when to transition from on the gas to on the brakes, when to sit, when to get into let's just use the apex of the corner, when to get into that power and commit to full power, get the bike vertical, hit the next obstacle. That depth perception is negatively impacted because of low blood sugar associated with a low calorie diet that's only worsened by somebody who goes to bed, can't sleep. Now they stack exhaustion on top of insufficient calories. Now they go out and they ride and they hit the ground. And remember what we said earlier. Insufficient calories are going to lead to inside out, brittle bones, brittle tendons, brittle ligaments, brittle muscles. So now they have a relatively benign get off, hit the ground, and they break like a white cracker, right? Just literally snap like a white cracker. So the idea here is we need to ask ourselves, why is this happening? Well, because you have an uneducated group of people that are telling these athletes on one end of the spectrum, you have to race your ass off. In the PTO, these guys are racing 2 to 3 times a month. And by the way, this is crisscrossing. These are long flights. Then they've got to try to recover from that. And this is where motocross is extremely hard, because if you're training in the heat all week long and then you're wearing all that gear on top of a 600-degree motorcycle, you see how this is just a compounding problem. And it would be better if everybody understood the value of sleep and food. Now, obviously, that's my wheelhouse. I really want to make that crystal clear. I respect the idea that this is my wheelhouse. But Dan, if you own a motor company and I'm coming to you and I'm going to pay you a good $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 for a couple of race motors, I'm depending on you to tell me, what do I need to put in that motor so it runs to the way the moto dynoed out at? If I fail to put that in there, the only person that I could be mad at is myself, because you showed with this fuel, with this oil, with this size radiator and this radiator fluid, this is where the motor is going to perform optimally. And that's what we specialize with our company is every single one of our athletes knows what their critical speed number is, their threshold of fatigue is, they know what their calorie numbers are, they know what their proper hydration, they know what their sweat rate is. And we just simply funnel that in on a daily basis. And then we evaluate recovery, which is sleep. And we just make adjustments day in and day out. Go back to the title of our show. Very, very fine line between being fit and being extremely frustrated. And I'm talking somebody who's a parent, balancing a profession, family. It's not just a pro and it's not just a little, prepubescent athlete. It's the entire spectrum. The beautiful part is any parent that's listening to this, if they can get this information into their athlete early, there comes a point where you'll frog hop past somebody because of what you said, Dan. The people who don't pay attention to calories and hydration and sleep, they're going to get surpassed by the less talented athlete who year over year can stack performance. Those incremental gains are guaranteed.
And like you said earlier, with Loretta Lynn's is coming up this next week, right? I know that there's a lot of parents that listen to the podcast, and they're probably listening on the way to Loretta's maybe. But what you said kind of struck my interest a little bit, and that being these kids, they're children. They're not developed fully yet. A lot of them haven't hit puberty or just hit puberty. So the testosterone and the HGH hasn't fully, taken into their body. And I don't know if I said that right, but they're not developed, right? And they may be a little chubby, right? And that's just, it's baby fat. I think we were probably all a little bit chubby at one stage in our life. And there's no reason to let somebody tell them that, hey, you gotta lose that weight. You're too fat, right?
Yeah.
They need to be patient and let their body and puberty take place first before you start making these are life-changing, career-changing decisions potentially, right? Because we see a lot of times, I see kids at the track, they're like sticks and bones, Rob, and they crash and they just arms broke. And the next thing you know, they're out for 8 to 12 weeks. And they get back on the bike, and next thing you know, boom, their collarbone's done. Next thing you know, it's another 8 to 12 weeks. So the time that they're spending injured could be the time that they could be riding, letting their body develop properly, get the proper nutrition, everything else. And in the end, they're going to be the guy out front because the other guys are going to be injured, right?
You articulated it beautifully. If you think about what is the foundation of high-level performance, it has to be health. And when you flip that model upside down in the name of sponsorship, you flip that upside down based on parent pressure. As I always say this, like with our professional triathletes, when they have a young athlete that's 13, 14 years old, the child didn't go down to the store and buy a $12,000 time trial bike. You pulled it out. You thought it was a great idea to get them into triathlon. Now you've got to recognize the fact that they're still your child first before they were an elite triathlete. You've got to recognize the idea that, this should be more of, if you're really, and I want to make sure that we don't convolute. I'm talking everybody, whether you're an average 85 rider in the motocross world or you're a vet rider, if you're 15 to 19 age group runner or triathlete, or whether you're in the masters. That's why I said earlier, it's the broad spectrum. It's the two ends of the bookcase. Everything we've spoken about today cannot be ignored. And that's why I always like to draw a parallel back to the mechanic side of it. When you say to me, Rob, I'm going to build you a motor, and you have to state the specifications of the motor build, what happens if I don't? The motor grenades. There's nobody that has any fundamental mechanical background that would go, well, we can push our way through that. I'm an uneducated mechanic, and I'm going to tell you that if you run diesel engine and you run the wrong viscosity of the oil, if I tell you enough, I can make it work. That's how asinine that mindset is. So you're going to tell me, because the body can adapt, you're going to try to encourage it to run calorically restricted, even though when you go and you get a blood panel done and you look at your profile of blood and it's already showing that you're deficient on something. Remember what we say. You're only deficient on something because A, you're not eating enough, B, you're burning it quicker than you can get it in, or C, you're not absorbing what you're eating. Very simple, just like nutrition. Don't make it more complicated than it is. Now, if I get your blood work back and you see that you're out of range, and then the so-called trainer is telling you that you need to cut back calories, how do you expect the body to ever develop? As we said, get to the point of being an elite athlete, being an accomplished athlete. If you're losing 40 pounds, you're an accomplished athlete. So don't misunderstand that illustration. The idea here is, if you're building a mechanical device, and I tell you, I'm an uneducated mechanic, but I'm here to tell you that if you run diesel fuel and you run the wrong viscosity of oil, if I just convince you, or I call you enough negative names, and I can convince you that mechanical motor is going to run on the inappropriate fuel and oil, that's how silly it seems to me when you have an uneducated person that's trying to advocate caloric restriction, high volume, high intensity, suck it up buttercup, name calling. And then when you want to argue with me, I'll show you those 3 or 4 athletes I've been successful with. And then when you get chewed up by the system, I'll spit you out. I say this very, very humbly. In the motocross world, we have 271 amateur national titles. But I can also look you in the eyes and tell you, like in our endurance division, I have never had an athlete that hired us to complete an event, a marathon, a triathlon of any distance. We have 100% completion rate. Now, I'm not patting myself on the back. I didn't create physiology. I didn't create nutrition, but I have to respect the principles of both of them. And then my goal is to take the education and the experience and the clinical studies and all that we've done and put that in a format that people can simply understand it. And this is what's kind of interesting. Over the years, I'm going to show my age here. This is my 38th year of doing this. There's, especially as talking forums and keyboard experts, there's been questions, has Rob worked with a lot of top professionals? Yeah, every single sport, from car racing to wakeboarding to BMX to motocross and everything in between. Well, why don't the athletes stick with them very long? Because I don't want them to. I don't need to become somebody's man friend. I don't need to become a monthly expense for an extended period of time. If I can help you understand the principles of physiology, nutrition, help you build the personal framework, I don't ever want an athlete for long periods of time. Now, do I have some? Yes, I have some athletes I've had 18, 19 years, but the story's different. They started out, this is in the motocross world, they started out on an 85, got themselves up to 250 pro sport at Loretta's, decided they wanted to be on their motorcycle more than 8 minutes at a national, so they went into off-road racing, did well with off-road racing, fell in love, got married, still racing. Well, now they've decided they want to get into becoming a very high-end triathlete. You see how the years stack? It goes back, like you said, athletic maturity, phenomenal parents. The parents were willing to listen, asked a lot of questions. I would always ask the parents to be on the call because they'll hear it a little bit differently than the athlete. Maybe some of the information is even ahead of their pay grade. However, if they can internalize some of the basic information and understand the why, then I've done my job. Whether that's for 8 months or 18 years, everybody's a little bit different, but I never, ever want somebody to become dependent on me. If you want to, that's why we have a consultation service. If you want me just to help you interpret numbers, I'm not trying to sales pitch anybody. Everybody can get a hold of me. If you're willing to wear the Garmin, you're willing to capture data, we can build a profile for you, but never will you find me. And just to be honest and transparent, that's why I only do month-to-month contracts, because I don't want anybody having buyer's remorse. I don't want anybody locked into a long-term contract. And like with the pros, just again, in 100% transparency, we do a small base and we get paid on bonuses, because I have a strong feeling that if you aren't winning on bonuses, if you're performing well and you're getting paid heavy bonuses, I would like to get my little bit of percentage off of your performance results. You'll never see me lock you down to a big contract, because that just creates complacency. And unfortunately, complacency means lose-lose for both of us.
Well,
Now,
and you start getting bitter, right? Like, oh my God, I'm
yeah,
paying all this money for this. I'm
yep,
not getting the results I want. Why
yep.
am I paying this money? And then that starts to strain the relationship. So I think
Well,
by doing that,
put those two together, though, Dan. Put those two together. If I'm obligated to your results,
mhm,
I'm going to be very, very committed to, not because I'm in love of money, I'm committed to results. Getting
right.
paid for getting good results, that's just a fringe benefit. And I know it sounds a little hokey. I'm not in it for the money. Bullshit. Everybody starts a business to make a living, right? My point is I'm more interested in the result. And because of that, I like the idea that if you're not getting the results, as long as you give me a fair and equitable chance to be able to research the blood and the heart rate data and all that goes into it, collectively, you and I'll figure it out. That's when I believe that we deserve, because we've earned a bonus. What's wrong with that? I don't want to touch your base salary. I only want to get paid on bonuses. However, another reason why I do month-to-month contracts, the same reason why the client can fire me, right? They don't like my personality. They think my numbers are a little bit overwhelming. On the same token, if you don't eat enough, you don't sleep enough, you don't focus on your hydration, I'm going to drop you, because I have a very long waiting list. And I say that very respectfully and humbly, but I'm not here to convince somebody to become successful and healthy. I should put healthy in front of successful, because there's a lot of wealthy people that will tell you that they have no health. And I would never be a part of that. I will never ruin somebody's health in the name of performance. And I'm not Mr. Captain Perfect. I'm just saying, I think it's morally offensive that somebody would be willing to take a check and even go on a public forum and say, I don't care about their health. I only care about championships and results. So, okay, let me get this straight. If I don't care about your health and your wellness, and all I do is care about cashing those big checks, and then when you get smoked and you have literally a bloodborne disease, Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue syndrome, Addison's disease, and I just push you to the curb and I just funnel in 3 more athletes, how does that make any sense to anybody? And by the way, this is across all 4 of our verticals. We see it every single day.
Well,
People that will go and pay tons of money just to get completely smashed, and literally they're unhealthy, and they're coming to us and, can you fix it? And absolutely, I can fix it. I would just rather never have to fix it. Just get in front of it. I apologize. I talked over you.
no, it reminds me of Ice Cube. I saw a interview he did the other day. You know who Ice Cube is, right?
No, sir.
He's a rapper. He's been in some movies. The movie
Oh, Ice
Friday. Have you ever?
Cube.
Yeah. Have you ever
Ice
seen
Cube. I'm sorry.
Ice
Yes, sir.
Cube?
Yeah. Yep. Sorry.
There was he declined a movie, like a $30 million movie that he was going to make on this, because he didn't want to take a medical intervention that he was required to for this movie. And they said, why didn't you do it just to get the money? And he said, because being healthy is the most important thing in life. Because
Mhm.
if I'm not healthy, then I got to take that money that you gave me to go get healthy. It's much
Yes,
easier
sir.
for me just to be healthy from the get-go. And I thought that was cool, because he's absolutely
It's
right.
priceless.
You cannot buy
Yep.
health, and being healthy is the most important thing at all costs,
Yep.
to make sure you're healthy. And that includes being an athlete, and being an elite athlete. You have to be healthy first to be
Exactly.
successful.
If you guys follow me on Instagram, it's at Coach Robb Beams on Instagram. I posted a couple years ago. This is a really cool picture text on Instagram, and it just said, if you don't take the time to become healthy, you'll have to make the time for your sickness. And yeah, that sounds a little elitist and all that, but when I've got people that are literally, and I say, this is not me, this is a conversation that I've received several times over the years. I can never spend the amount of money that I have. I'm independently wealthy. Unfortunately, I don't have the health to enjoy it. Those are the conversations I get on the phone from people that say, What can you do to help me? And it's the same thing I would do with a little guy or a little girl on a 85 motorcycle or a wakeboard or a skateboard. Foundation of food, health, sleep, volume of training, breaking the percentage down to make sure that the body can absorb it, and just incremental improvements week over week. And I know we're in a society, especially nowadays, where everything's a quick fix, quick satisfaction. I'm not anyone's cup of tea if you're looking for a quick fix, especially if you want to cheat. There's a lot of so-called trainers out there that are willing to cheat because their ego is caught up on you being miserable, getting great results, and then giving them a little, pardon me, a little token of appreciation on the podium. But where are those athletes three years later? That's the part to me that, and as a coaching company, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, where we want more accountability with the coaches. You know, if you're willing to do your blood work and you're willing to let us evaluate your sleep and your food gaps and all the stuff that we've talked about in all of our podcasts together, if you're willing to let us evaluate that, I will promise you that you'll never get sick. And we're going to be announcing some stuff probably the beginning of next year that we're going to change the sporting world in every vertical that we're involved with, because I don't want to talk about it anymore. There's got to be a generational change. And like we talked about in the podcast where we went decade by decade, it's very difficult for me to get a parent of a young soccer player who thinks all they need is skills and drills, which I'm all about. But unfortunately, as you said earlier, Dan, there comes a point where sweat and calories and sleep and the ability to recover, whether it's on the field or off the field, becomes absolutely imperative. And it just compounds decade over decade. So I want to get in front of it on the front side. And then for somebody who may be finding us for the first time at whatever age or decade you're in, we can fix what's broken and we can set a new trajectory. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, and it will take time. And that's where I think it's interesting. You know, I'm not going to beg somebody to become successful. I will do my level best to educate the why we do everything. And my whole idea is once you understand the why and you're comfortable, dude, fly, baby, fly, go get it. Because I'm always available. You can always come back and we can reconsult, we can reconvene, we can work together for another 3 or 4 months. Fly, baby, come back when you need something. And that's what we're trying to do with our elite level of coaches, is get people to be more independent with true knowledge. We've got the results, and I say that very humbly. But to sit and argue with somebody who says, oh, well, he doesn't retain his athletes very long, that's intentional. You know, I don't need anybody to be dependent on me.
Yeah.
As you develop as an athlete, we'll develop with you. But they're, especially for somebody who's been misinformed, and Dan, you and I know a bunch of people in the motocross world that they say the same thing. Oh, if I'd heard this 20 years ago, I would have been a better professional, or maybe I would have turned pro. And that breaks my heart, because I'd like to get in front of their kids now so that maybe they don't have that same regret. So it's all part of the process.
Well, Coach, unfortunately, I feel that way, but my kid wants to do gymnastics, and she wants to be a little princess. She doesn't want to be a professional motocross racer. So
I don't know how they could.
We're screwed on
down
that
there. Well, they hit that pommel horse at 40 miles an hour. I'd rather hit a 120-foot triple than hit that pommel horse. But that's just kidding. Me.
Coach Robb, it's been real. Thank you so much for your time today, listeners. Thank you guys so much. If you guys are watching us on YouTube, thank you. Make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe. Hit CoachRobb.com on the web. That'll get you to all the links if you're looking for complete med solutions, energy, fuel, the Garmin stuff, anything that you're interested in that Coach Robb offers, CoachRobb.com. Anything else, Coach?
The only thing I'd like to add is, if you happen to be a new subscriber or somebody's been with us for a while now, please remember, always feel free to send us a question. We will answer it. You do not have to be on payroll to get an answer. You can send it to us at contact@CoachRobb. Remember, it's got 2 B's. Contact@CoachRobb.com. I will definitely get back to you. I personally answer all my emails. And if you guys haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so. If you're here on YouTube, Coach Robb Beams is the channel. I put up a video every morning going through everything under the sun, and they're all questions that come in from you guys. So please take advantage of that. I'd love to help. And Dan, I want to say thank you again for a great show, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks, bud.
See you guys.